She laughed softly, as if she held the whole world inside her chest, and only let the sound escape when she danced with him. In the late afternoons, the living room would become an enchanted hall, where she would lead him with improvised steps and looks, full of everything that would never be said. He swore it was just a game, just a way to forget the hard days, but she knew that his body memorized every turn, every pause, every touch. In that dance, she gave her soul, without promises, without demands, only hope. And then, on the wedding day, not theirs but his with another, the music started. And that was when she understood. The steps were the same, the look the same. The dance was hers, but the applause was for someone else. The first time the bride turned, she recognized the spin. The second time, she felt her legs weaken. When he lifted her into the air, exactly as they had practiced in the modest room, she didn't need to see any more. It was their dance, the one they had invented together, the one he pretended not to take seriously. And now, in the center of a brightly lit room, he was showing her off with another one, as if it were his own creation. But what no one there saw was the woman sitting in the back, in a simple dress, holding the glass with both hands as if it were supporting her. Because there, amid the laughter of the guests, she knew she had taught his soul to dance, and now she was just an audience member in her own stolen story. And the Aua universe, which sees everything, had not yet begun to charge her. If this story has already caught your attention in the first few seconds, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It makes all the difference in helping more people find stories like this. In the small living room where the afternoon sun drew warm rectangles on the wooden floor, she danced as if she were talking to the invisible. Grace was light on her feet, almost shy, but when she heard that old music, a vinyl jazz that hissed at the beginning, she transformed. She moved her arms as if she were holding something that didn't yet exist, but that she already desired with everything she was. Nathan, the tenant upstairs, would sometimes come down with excuses that ranged from a problem with the refrigerator to, "I forgot my coat last time," but he always ended up on the couch, laughing, watching the dance with the eyes of someone who no longer wanted to go home. She said she was just stretching, that it was silly, that she had never really been a dancer. But it was a lie. It was embarrassed love. It was the way he found to not say everything at once. The radio was old, the walls were thin, but when they were there, nothing seemed to fall apart. Grace would pull him by the hand and say, "Go on, try this," and he would stumble, laugh, miss a step, but he would get back up. He would always get back up. Soon, he knew the order of the moves, the turn with his hand on her shoulder, the step back, with his eyes fixed on hers, and when he made a mistake, she would say it didn't matter. "It's more beautiful when we make mistakes together." They didn't call it rehearsal or even dancing. It was just time passing more slowly, like a Sunday that never ends, and no one there would say what was growing between them. She didn't dare ask about other women. He never talked about the future. The present already seemed too delicate to put any weight on. Grace started marking the days he would come on. The calendar. Not that she said it out loud, but each little red dot was a hope. Maybe today he would come down. And he did. Sometimes with pizza, sometimes just with empty hands and the desire to be there. She laughed, offered tea, taught him one more move. Sometimes, after the last song, they would both fall silent. He would hold her gaze. So would she. But they would never cross the line. Because maybe the line didn't exist. And then, on a Wednesday when the sky promised rain, and the record was playing slower than usual, he arrived with a white envelope in his hands and a distant look in his eyes. Grace felt it even before he spoke. Something was off. She didn't know what the next step would be. Still, she smiled. Still, she danced. The next day, Grace woke up to the smell of coffee burning in the kitchen. A common oversight, but that morning it felt like an omen. The white envelope was still there on the side table, like a silent threat. She hadn't opened it, and Nathan hadn't said anything either. He'd just left it there. He'd just disappeared. His absence that day weighed like a whole body on her shoulders. The radio kept playing the same tracks as always, but none of them sounded the same. Each song seemed to mock her, reminding her that Nathan's feet hadn't stepped on the living room floor that night, that the dance was suspended, that the beat had been broken. 3 days later, he came back. And he came back smiling, as if nothing had been interrupted. As if the space left by his absence hadn't screamed in her ears every minute. He was carrying a paper bag, inside which were 2 pairs of men's dancing shoes. "I brought these because I saw these on sale. What if you turn me into something better, huh?" Grace forced a smile. The envelope was still in the same place, untouched. She asked him with her eyes, but he looked away. He said it wasn't important, that he just had to take care of some things outside. But his voice no longer had the same delivery. It wasn't a lie. It was an omission. And it hurt just the same. Little by little the rehearsals returned, but the spontaneity did not. Grace noticed that he no longer laughed in the same way, that his eyes were searching for something beyond the room, as if they were there out of gratitude or habit and not by choice. Still, she clung to what was left, to the few moments when he gave in and let his body speak, to the moments when the two of them fit together as if no other way was possible. Grace began to anticipate his steps, subtly directing, trying to keep him there in that bubble of the recent past. But even those who dance together can be stepping in opposite directions without realizing it. One afternoon, he stayed longer than usual. They sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. Nathan stared out the window. "Do you believe that there are people who meet someone just to teach them what they're going to use on someone else?" he asked suddenly. Grace pretended not to understand. She answered with a half smile and a question. "And do you believe that there are people who teach even though they know that?" The silence between them was like a blank space in a score, loaded, painful, necessary. The next day, he didn't show up, or the day after that. The following week, a friend of Grace's met her at the fair and said in passing, "Nathan's getting married, right? His fiancée is pretty. He showed me a picture." She smiled, as if that were normal, as if she knew, but her stomach turned. Her hands shook, and the white envelope still there on the table seemed to take on a new weight. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. The contents had been dancing around inside her for a long time, and now, finally, she was stepping too hard. That night, Grace danced alone. The radio played the same old track over and over, like a scratched record stuck in a memory. She moved her arms more steadily than usual, but her eyes were moist. Each step felt like an effort to hold the world in place. The spin, the touch of the air, the rhythm, it was all there, but it was missing body, missing presence. And that was what hurt the most. His absence had shape, smell, sound. Nathan had left too many footprints in that room. And now every corner whispered his name over and over. For the next few days, Grace pretended to be normal. She worked as usual, greeted her neighbors, but inside the music wouldn't stop playing. She could hear it even in the silence, like a ghostly trail. The name of her fiancé began to circulate around the neighborhood. Emma. Beautiful, elegant, different from Grace, someone had said, and she heard it. She pretended not to hear. She swallowed hard. Some people asked if she was going to the wedding. "You were so close to him, weren't you?" She smiled with her lips, but she was bleeding inside. Then one day, Nathan appeared at the door. He was holding an invitation in his hands, thick paper, gold letters. "It will be simple, but special," he said, without looking her in the eye. She took the envelope without saying anything. The room was tidy as always. Music played softly, but nothing moved inside it. "I wish you were there," he added. Grace almost laughed. She thought of everything they had experienced in that space, the dances, the veiled confidences, the hands that touched as if seeking shelter. Now, he invited her as if she were just another name on the list. When he left, she held the invitation for a long moment before opening it. Inside was the date, the location, Emma's name in soft letters. There was a small phrase below, "Love is the oldest dance in the world." Grace squeezed her eyes shut. It wasn't just irony, it was cruelty. It was as if he were mocking everything they'd been through without even realizing it. And yet, she knew she would go. Not because I wanted to see him happy. not because I wanted to pretend to be mature, but because I had to face it head on, as if fate itself was challenging her to watch the choreography that had begun with her and would end with someone else all the way through. The day before the wedding, she took the dress out of the closet. It was simple, dark blue, with subtle details on the sleeves. It wasn't new, but it was hers. And for the first time in a long time, she danced looking into the mirror. Every step, every movement, as if she was saying to herself, "I'm still here. I still know who I am." The tear fell at the end of the song, but she didn't wipe it away. She let it flow like the last note of a solo that no one applauded. The next day, before leaving, she looked into the living room. She touched the back of the sofa where he usually sat. Then he turned off the radio. The silence seemed more fair than any soundtrack. Because now there was no dancing, just the echo of everything that was left unsaid. The room was large, decorated with hanging lights and white flowers that seemed to float. The place exuded a kind of controlled happiness, as if everything there had been carefully rehearsed to be beautiful, but not overdone. Grace arrived early, sitting discreetly in the back, close to the wall, her blue dress covering her crossed knees. She had chosen a corner where no one would see her right away, where she could observe without being observed. The background music was soft, generic, designed to calm the nerves. But she wasn't nervous. She was empty. People passed by smiling. Some acquaintances greeted her with restrained surprise, as if to say with their eyes, "Did you really come?" She just nodded. There was nothing more to say. Inside, everything that hurt had already been danced so many times that it no longer bled. It just throbbed. When the ceremony began, she held her breath. Emma walked in looking beautiful, exactly as a bride would be expected to. Nathan was waiting for her at the altar with a new smile, a sparkle in his eyes that Grace no longer recognized. Or maybe she pretended not to recognize. The justice of the piece's words echoed through the space, but she heard nothing. The sound seemed distant, muffled, as if it were underwater. Each phrase about companionship and dancing life together was an arrow that didn't pierce right through. It just pushed deeper. And then, after the kiss, the applause, the hugs, and the flashbulbs, the moment arrived. The music began to play. A beat she recognized even before the full melody emerged. Grace's eyes widened. It was their song, the one that started there. Rehearsals. The one that played on sunny afternoons with the windows open. In the center of the room, Nathan held out his hand to Emma. The two began to dance. And with the first turn, Grace knew. The sidestep, the inverted turn, the pause with the touch on the back. Everything was the same. Exactly as she had taught. The entire room sighed, enchanted. They commented on the couple's harmony, the delicacy of the choreography. No one knew that this dance had begun in a modest room between two bodies that never declared themselves to each other, but understood each other in silence. Each movement there was a crooked mirror of the story that no one saw happen, except her. Grace sat there. She didn't applaud. She didn't cry. She just pressed her fingers together until her skin hurt. Her eyes never wavered. And when Nathan lifted Emma with precision, the same move he'd gotten so many times wrong before getting right in rehearsals, Grace felt something snap inside her. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was loss. It was like watching her soul being used as part of a show she hadn't been invited to, even though she'd written the first note of the score. And then, when the music ended and the guests applauded, Grace slowly stood up. He left the glass untouched on the table. She adjusted her dress with the same calmness with which one folds a letter that will never be sent. And she left, without looking back. Because there, in that fragrant and smiling room, she was no longer the author of the dance. She was only the silence between the applause. The street was dark when she left. The muffled sounds of the party still escaped through the doors of the ballroom, mixed with the laughter of distracted guests and the clinking of glasses. But for Grace, everything was silent, an absolute silence, the kind that comes from within, that you hear not with your ears, but with your body. She walked aimlessly for a few blocks, her heels tapping on the asphalt like the beats of a tired heart. Her dress swayed lightly as if trying to keep up with the rhythm of a song that only she could hear. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She just walked, her eyes dry and her hands cold. When she got home, she didn't turn on the light. She took off her shoes at the door, as she always did, and walked down the hall in silence. The radio was still in its usual place, but it wasn't playing. She approached it slowly, almost reverently, and turned the knob. The music started softly, like an ancient whisper from a time that was no more. Grace stood there, standing in the middle of the room, looking at the empty spaces, the sofa where he sat, the rug where they danced, the window that reflected the moonlight on the polished floor. And then, without rehearsal, without thinking, she began to dance. Alone, barefoot. The same steps, the same turn, the same ending with her arms outstretched in the air, as if holding what she had already lost. Only now, each gesture had a new weight. It was no longer about remembrance, it was about liberation. Grace danced not for him but for herself, for everything she had carried in silence, for everything she had offered without receiving, for every time she had waited for a gesture that never came. With each movement she loosened a knot. With each step she let go of the guilt that was not hers. Outside, the night went on, as if nothing had happened. But inside, in the center of that small room, something was changing. Grace felt her eyes sting. She let a tear fall, just one, and she smiled. Not a smile of relief, but of acceptance. Not everything that begins between two bodies needs to blossom in public. Some stories are meant to end in silence, because their noise only hurts. She understood this late, but she understood it. And that was enough. The next morning he woke up early. He made coffee. She looked at the light coming through the window and knew she was alive. It still hurt, but it was different. It wasn't the pain of waiting. It was the pain of accepting. And accepting is sometimes the first step to starting over. He picked up the wedding envelope and tore it open slowly, as if closing a cycle. Then he threw the pieces in the trash, washed his hands calmly, and opened the window. The world outside didn't know it, but something had been restored inside her. There was no audience, there was no music, but the stage was hers, and the next step too. Time passed without fanfare. The days began to take on a rhythm of their own, far from the rhythm that had previously depended on Nathan's presence. Grace returned to her routine with discreet movements, as if she were relearning to inhabit her own skin. The radio was still on the shelf, but she didn't turn it on as often. The living room remained the same, but now it was sacred territory, no longer an altar of memories, but a shelter for new beginnings. She arranged the cushions with more care, watered the plants with more patience, and little by little she returned presence to the things that had become just scenery. At the community school where she worked, requests for extracurricular activities began to appear. It was one of the students who suggested, "You dance, right, Aunt Grace? Will you teach us?" She hesitated. She didn't answer right away. But at night, lying in bed, she looked at the dark ceiling and let the question echo. How many things had she given away without a name, without value, just because they were offered with love? Teaching those steps would be like spreading pieces of herself, but maybe it was time to share, not to keep. The following week, she organized the first meeting. She used the same radio as always. She chose light, old-school music, the kind that carries soul. At first the children laughed, made mistakes, stumbled, but soon their eyes began to shine like Nathan's had in the first rehearsals. Only now, Grace saw things differently. Every wrong step was an invitation, every attempt a pure gesture. There was no hidden promise there, there was surrender, and that was what she needed, a space where she could give without being torn apart by expectations. The meetings began to happen twice a week, the small schoolroom filled with smiles, stamping feet and joyful shouts. Grace was returning home with her body tired, but her heart less heavy. For the first time in a long time, she slept without replaying dialogues, without rewriting endings that never happened. The pain was still there, of course, but she had learned to dance with it, and that changed everything. One afternoon, while sorting through vinyl records at home, she found an old notebook. In it were sketches of the steps she had created with Nathan, small drawings, scribbled notes. Spinning lightly, staring, trust. Mistakes are also hugs. She leafed through it slowly, as if she were tracing a memory with her fingers. At the bottom of the last page, a sentence written in her shaky handwriting. If he learns to dance, maybe he will learn to love. Grace closed her eyes. She pressed the notebook to her chest, and when she opened them, she felt that the sentence no longer needed to make sense. It was just a trace of a woman who had loved in silence, and now loved herself with sound. The music in the classroom was different. The children were already beginning to create their own steps. Grace smiled, corrected postures, encouraged turns, and inside her a new kind of happiness spread. It wasn't noisy. It wasn't heroic, but it was hers. For the first time she danced so as not to lose someone. She danced to remain whole. That afternoon, a woman in a light-colored dress entered the school classroom holding a boy by the hand. She had a polite but distant look, as if she would rather be somewhere else. It was Emma. Grace recognized her immediately, not by the photo on the invitation, but by her gestures, by her presence, and, most importantly, by Nathan's absence. The school principal accompanied her, explaining that the boy had difficulty concentrating and that his mother was looking for something artistic to help with his behavior. Emma seemed attentive but not involved. She just wanted to solve the problem. Grace stood her ground, as if nothing was at stake. She smiled gently and introduced herself. "I'm Grace, nice to meet you. We have dance lessons every Wednesday and Friday. He can start today if he wants." The boy was shy but curious. He played the record player with fascination. Grace said, "This one has heard many stories without words." Emma smiled for the first time, a small smile, almost resigned, as if she didn't expect miracles, only relief. The classes continued. The boy, named Liam, was clumsy but diligent, and little by little he began to improve. He laughed more. He jumped. He created. One afternoon, while he was putting away his dance shoes, he blurted out, "My mom says Daddy doesn't dance anymore." Grace bent down to his height, handed him the shoes, and replied tenderly, "Sometimes we just forget the music, but it comes back." He nodded as if he believed her, and he ran away with the crooked steps of someone who is relearning to occupy space with joy. The following week, Emma returned. She arrived before class ended. Through the half-open door she saw the teacher twirling with her students, laughing as if the world had space to begin again. When Grace left, the two passed each other in the hallway. Emma looked at her firmly, but without aggression. "You are the Grace of dance, aren't you?" The question came dryly, without beating around the bush. Grace didn't deny it. "Yes, I am." Then Emma lowered her eyes and said, "He hasn't danced like that since we got married." Grace felt something freeze inside her, but she didn't show it. She just stared back at him steadily. Some dances are unique, even if the steps are the same. Emma seemed to hear more than she wanted to. He thanked her quietly, turned, and walked away. And, in that moment, Grace knew. The past she had lived in silence was now a ghost living in another woman's house. Time, which had seemed stagnant before, was now beginning to move in a different way. Grace no longer expected reunions or hidden notes. She only expected the school schedules, the attentive gazes of the children, and the music that filled the room like a balm. But there was something she didn't expect. Seeing Emma there again, even when she didn't need to. She began to arrive earlier, sitting silently in the back of the room while her son danced. She didn't say anything. She just watched, sometimes with a slight smile, other times with her eyes so fixed that they seemed to beg for something that not even she could name. Grace didn't ask questions, didn't start conversations. She just welcomed them with her presence. She knew that there were pains that couldn't be unlocked by words, only by time. One day, after school, Liam ran into his mother's arms, out of breath, and shouted, "Today I danced just like Daddy showed me once." Emma froze for a second. She smiled weakly. She looked at Grace and then said, "He danced much better with you." It wasn't an accusation. It was a confession. And in that moment, the room seemed smaller. The silence between them spoke louder than any outburst. Grace approached slowly, put her hand on the woman's shoulder and said without vanity, "Dance is just a reflection. What you see is what remains." Emma said nothing. She just nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. Over the next few days, she began to get closer to the children, helping with small details, tying shoelaces, fixing hair ribbons. Grace let her. It was as if Emma was searching for something that she herself had lost. And there, amidst the children's footsteps and the songs playing on the radio again, she seemed to find little crumbs of herself again. Then, one afternoon, Liam came running in and said his father would come get him. Grace felt her body stiffen. It wasn't fear. It was the echo of something she had already buried. When class ended, she was organizing her materials when she heard the door open. Nathan, more mature, with wrinkles around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He wore a restrained expression, but when he saw her, his face lost its rehearsal. For a second, they just looked at each other. No words. Just the overwhelming presence of the past between them. "Grace," he said in a whisper, but she didn't answer. She just handed him his backpack with a slight nod. He held it tightly, as if he wanted to say something that no longer fit at the moment. Emma was behind him, looking vacant. Liam ran to his father, and before they left, Nathan looked around the room, then at Grace and murmured, "He dances like you." And then they were gone. And in that instant, Grace understood. What she had offered without a name now existed in the body of a child, in the silence of a woman, and in the regret of a man who danced. Without music, karma doesn't shout, it just gives back. That night was long. Grace didn't go to bed early, but she didn't get lost in memories like she used to. She sat in the living room, staring out the window, listening to the small cracks of the city breathing. The image of Nathan standing there staring blankly at the school floor wouldn't leave her mind. There was something different about him, not just his age or his tired expression, but his lack of lightness. He seemed to carry his own weight with every gesture, as if the life he had chosen was tighter than he had anticipated. The next day, Emma showed up at school alone. She asked to talk. They sat on a bench in the courtyard under a tree. She looked fragile but determined. "He doesn't dance with me anymore," she said bluntly. "Ever since Liam started school, he's been keeping to himself. He looks at him dancing and goes silent. Sometimes he looks happy. Other times he looks absent. I know it has to do with you." Grace didn't defend herself. She just listened. Emma then sighed and confessed, "I met him on a quick trip. We fell in love too quickly. He talked about a woman who taught him to dance, but he never really told her. He said it was something old. I thought I might be the new song, but I think I was just the silence after she stopped." Those words didn't come from arrogance. They came from pain, and Grace felt it. Emma wasn't to blame. She was living the reflection of choices that weren't hers to make, only inherited. And now, with a child in the middle and a husband absent in spirit, she too was dancing alone. "He thinks about you all the time, Grace, and I don't know what to do with that." Grace closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, she said firmly, "You have all of him, Emma, but what he left me, that can't be shared." Emma wept silently. There was no hug, only understanding. In the following days, Nathan didn't come back, but Liam did, and each time he danced, his steps became firmer, more natural. Grace saw in him not only a reflection of her father, but a chance for something that didn't require repeating his mistake. That boy could grow up free, without carrying silences that didn't belong to him. And maybe, in some way, that was already a form of redemption. One afternoon, while putting away her materials for class, Grace found a note in one of her folders. The handwriting was unmistakable. "You taught me more than dancing. You taught me what I lost out of fear. If you ever want to hear it, I'm waiting." There was no name, but then there was no need for it. She folded the paper, put it in a box, and locked it. Not out of revenge, but because some words, when they arrive late, no longer dance. In the days that followed, Grace noticed something curious. Liam's steps were different, more delicate, more precise, as if he were listening not only to the music, but to something beyond it. The soul, perhaps. "He has an inner ear," commented one of the volunteers. "It's sensitive, like someone who carries a memory." Grace smiled. She didn't explain. She just nodded. Because she knew. Dance was now an inheritance, and there was nothing more fair than that. Emma was still there, silent but constant. She helped, cleaned, organized. She never spoke of her husband again, and Grace didn't bring it up either. There was an implicit pact between them, not to rip open the wounds that were already trying to heal. But one day, at the end of class, Grace called Emma into the empty classroom. She turned on the radio, the same old song. She held out her hand. "Come." Emma hesitated in surprise. "I can't dance," Grace pressed. "But can you?" It was a simple moment. The two of them there, in the small space, moving their feet slowly. Emma stumbled. She laughed. She cried. Grace guided her patiently. It wasn't about technique. It was about release. When the song ended, Emma rested her head on Grace's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for not hating." "Me?" Grace replied in a firm but soft voice. "I hated the silence, not you." And in that moment something fell apart between them, as if what had been piled up with hurt had finally collapsed. A few days later, Grace got a call. An unfamiliar number. It was Nathan. His voice was shaky. "Can I see you, just for a moment?" She hesitated. She didn't answer right away. But something inside her, not longing but awareness, said yes. They met in a park, a neutral place, an open space. When he arrived, he seemed smaller, his shoulders hunched, his eyes lost. "You taught me to dance," he said, "but I used it to make myself look pretty. I didn't understand that it was a language, that you were talking to me when you pulled me by the arm." Grace listened to him, with her arms crossed, in silence. He continued, "I loved you, but I was a coward. I was afraid of where it might lead me. And in the end, I took someone else to the altar with your steps. I thought I could recreate it all, but you don't. Recreate yourself." She took a deep breath. The wind moved the leaves around them, a soft trail that enveloped them. "Life didn't punish you, Nathan," she said. "It just showed you, slowly, with time, with reflex, everything you tried to skip." He looked down. He didn't answer. She knew it was true. Before he left, he handed her something. A pair of old shoes. The ones he had bought years before, still with the tags on. "I never wore them," he murmured. She took them, looked him in the eye, and replied, "Because you weren't dancing for me." And she left him there, with the shoes, the silence, and the weight that was finally his alone. After that encounter, Grace no longer expected anything. No letters, no phone calls, no reappearances. She didn't cultivate hope, but she didn't close the windows either. She just let life happen, with the gentleness of someone who has learned that what needs to come, comes, and what doesn't come is not missed. She continued with her classes, now fuller, and more sought after. The children loved the way she explained the movements with stories, as if each step had a soul, each turn was a memory that needed space to breathe. Emma was there too, no longer just a spectator, but someone who was slowly rebuilding her identity in the midst of that small, noisy group. She became a regular volunteer. The children began to call her Auntie M. And deep down, Grace saw something new in her, a woman who might never have danced with her own feet, but was now beginning to dance with her heart. One afternoon after the last class, Grace was closing the classroom door when Liam ran up to her, holding a folded sheet of paper. "Mommy said this is yours." It was an old piece of paper, a little wrinkled. When she opened it, she recognized it immediately. Her own handwriting, a draft of a choreography with the same steps she used to do with Nathan, only this time there were pencil notes next to it, in a different, less sure hand. "Feel. Don't repeat. Stop before the touch. Return to the beginning with your eyes." They were the notes of someone trying to learn again. Emma appeared soon after. He found this in his father's things. He said he saw him crying with it in his hands. Grace didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at the paper, feeling the soft weight of what it now meant. Nathan was trying. But not with her anymore. Maybe not even for her, just with what was left of himself. It was the beginning of a conversation he was finally starting to have with his own silence. Later, Grace returned home with the paper tucked away between the pages of her old notebook, the same one where, years before, she had written that perhaps if he learned to dance, he would also learn to love. Now, she understood that this was not the case. Dancing was no guarantee of anything. It was just an expression, love, that requires courage, and courage sometimes only comes when it is too late. That night, Grace danced alone. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't out of longing or mourning. She danced because she felt light, because she had survived what many cannot, loving in silence, losing without crying out, being used as a bridge, and still remaining whole. Each step was a gesture of respect for herself, a thank you to her own body for having sustained her through the years of silence. And when the song ended, she didn't cry, she didn't smile. She just took a deep breath, as if she were resting. Because sometimes all karma gives back is not pain, it's clarity. The following months brought quiet changes. Grace, increasingly involved with her students, decided to open a small dance class open to the community. It wasn't a big deal. It took place on Thursday nights at the same school. But soon the room filled up. Young people, adults, even the elderly began to show up, curious, shy, wanting more than just learning to spin. They wanted to feel. They wanted to find themselves in the rhythm, and that's what she offered. Not perfect steps, but presence, eye to eye. Dance as healing. Emma had become part of the project. She helped with lists, organization, clothes, everything. And between one task and another, she danced, little by little, lightly. Grace watched her with silent affection. There was never any competition between them, only stories that crossed paths because of a man who didn't know how to dance to the love he received. Now each one was rebuilding herself in her own way. Emma, with hesitant steps, found rhythm. Grace, with firm feet, moved forward. Then on a cold night, Nathan appeared, without announcement, without ceremony. He entered the room before class started. His eyes sought Grace. When they found her, they lowered. But she stared at him, without fear, without anger, only with the firmness of someone who had survived. He approached, respecting her space. "I heard about the project. I came to see it." She didn't answer. She just walked over to the record player, chose a vinyl and put it on. The same song as always. The students were already in position. She called out, "Do you want to learn now?" The room went silent. Everyone understood that something bigger was at stake. Nathan hesitated, but he nodded. He came closer. She calmly corrected his shoulders and indicated the direction of his foot. Just like before, but with one difference. Now, she didn't offer her heart along with it. Just technique, just presence. They danced for a few minutes, the boo. Students followed their own rhythms. Nathan tried to keep up. He was slower but attentive. When the song ended, she simply said, "You're better now, because you know what you lost." He looked at her. There were tears, but she no longer absorbed them. It was no longer her mission to welcome what he had never known how to protect. Emma watched from afar, and when Nathan turned to leave, he walked past her and said, "You look beautiful when you dance." But Emma didn't answer, because now she knew that compliments alone don't sustain presence. Grace stood there, her hands resting on the record player, feeling the warmth of the room, the smell of old wood, the footsteps that echoed across the floor like witnesses to so many silent truths. That place, that dance, that moment, everything had become a mirror, and the reflection finally showed who really stayed and who just passed by. Winter arrived, bringing with it a different kind of silence. Not the silence of absence, but of maturity. The kind that no longer weighs on the shoulders, because it has found shelter within the chest. Grace now walked the streets as if she knew her worth. even if it had never been said out loud. The dance project grew slowly, like something that didn't need to be rushed. The students showed up, shared stories, left pieces of themselves on the floor of the classroom. And Grace collected all of this with the care of someone who has learned that pain can teach, but love transforms. One day, the school received an invitation to perform at a local event, something simple at the community center in town, with a small audience. Grace hesitated. She hadn't put herself out there this much since Nathan's wedding day, but the kids were excited, Liam especially. "Auntie Grace, can we dance to that song you taught us?" She paused for a moment. That song, the first one, the one he'd taken to the altar, the one she'd seen used as a showcase for something that had never been real. But now it was something else. It was theirs, the kids, something new. She agreed. They spent weeks rehearsing. The space was small, but the enthusiasm was immense. Emma helped out backstage. The costumes were handmade. Everything had a soul to it. On the night of the performance, the place was packed. Grace was waiting backstage when, among the faces in the audience, she saw something that made her breath catch. Nathan. He was standing in the back, hands in his pockets, and eyes fixed on the empty stage. But he wasn't the one who caught her attention. It was what happened next. When the music started, the same one that had made her bleed so many times inside, she saw something she had never imagined. Liam walked onto the stage, and with him, Emma. It hadn't been rehearsed. It hadn't been asked for. It was spontaneous. She danced with her son, laughing, making mistakes, spinning slowly. The applause came before it even finished, and deep down, Nathan was crying. But it wasn't for Grace, or for Emma. It was for him. Because there, before his eyes, the dance he had stolen was being given back to the world by the hands of someone he had never understood. Grace didn't go on stage. She stood on the sidelines, her eyes filled with tears and her heart full. When it was all over, the children ran up to her, the parents clapped, the organizer thanked her. Emma hugged her, and for the first time said, "Thank you for dancing even when no one was watching." Grace smiled. She didn't need trophies or excuses, because in that moment she understood. Her greatest act wasn't teaching Nathan. It was enduring the pain without losing her lightness. That night, when she got home, she turned on the radio. The record was spinning slowly, but the music sounded different, because now every note was hers, whole. She made some tea. She opened the window, and while the city slept, she danced alone in the room where it all began. But this time, not to remember, nor to forget, just to celebrate that she had survived what was left unsaid, what was taken away, what almost made her give up on herself. Each step was a whisper to the universe. I didn't leave, I stayed. And at the end of the dance, she smiled silently, because karma doesn't come back to hurt. It comes back to show and then leave. If this story touched your heart in any way, comment below. She was bigger than the pain. Leave your like, because it shows that you feel the same way we do. And if you are not yet registered, click now subscribe, because here, each story says what many people keep quiet. And now that you're here, the video that is appearing on the screen will break you into silence. He disappeared at the altar. Years later, she unknowingly taught him how to be a father. Watch it now, you won't come out the same, won't.